If we look at the world not only with our eyes, but through the deeper layers of consciousness, we will see that every human being carries within them two forces, light and darkness. Light is the part we are aware of goodness, kindness, intelligence, the capacity to love, and the aspiration to grow. Darkness, as Carl Jung defined it, is everything we deny. Our instincts, selfishness, jealousy, need for control, and unhealed wounds we refuse to face. Darkness is not the enemy, it is the unseen part of ourselves. Yet when someone cannot face their own darkness, they are forced to project it outward so that others carry it for them. And that is where attraction begins. The empath, or the chosen one, is a soul with soft, energetic boundaries. They don't build walls, they open doors. They sense the pain of others and unconsciously want to soothe it. But this very sensitivity makes them the perfect mirror. When a narcissist, someone who has buried their own shadow too deep, meets such a soul, it's as if they have encountered their missing part. The light in the empath's eyes both fascinates and terrifies them. They crave closeness, not to learn love, but to possess what they lack. Thus begins a kind of battlefield never drawn on any map, but one that every empath has walked through a war without blood or weapons, yet capable of exhausting the soul. The invisible battle between the empath's intuition and the temptation of darkness. Everything happens in silence, delicate vibrations between two frequencies. One nourishes, the other drains. And in the middle stands the empath, one who feels everything with their soul, but must learn not to be consumed by it. The empath has a strange, almost supernatural ability. They can feel truth even without proof. They don't need words to know who is hiding what. Their body knows, their energy knows. When someone lies, the air thickens, and the person's voice rings in their mind like hollow metal. When someone is hurting, they feel it in their own heart. When someone is angry, they sense the racing heartbeat within their own chest. It's a gift and a test. Narcissists, with their predatory instincts, are always drawn to this energy. They sense light the way moths sense flame, not to be illuminated, but to possess. In their eyes, the empath is a gateway to life, to emotions they have long lost. So they approach not with love, but with the intent to claim the light. The battle that follows is not between two people, but between consciousness and unconsciousness. The empath enters with an open heart, the narcissist with a flawless mask. One feels with the soul, the other performs by reflex. One listens to understand, the other listens to manipulate. At first, the empath believes they've met a kindred spirit, the same stories, the same wounds, the same eyes that seem to understand. It feels like destiny. But in truth, it is karma, the soul, recognizing an old lesson. To use intuition as a compass, not as a chain. The narcissist knows how to scramble the empath's emotional radar. They imitate the frequency of love, simulate empathy, even copy the language of the soul. They speak words that soften the empath's heart and use just enough warmth to make it seem real. And when the empath senses something's off, the narcissist gently makes them doubt themselves. You're too sensitive. You're imagining things. Those soft words are daggers. When the empath begins to distrust their intuition, they lose their greatest weapon. The inner radar still works, but they stop believing its signal. Darkness seeps in slowly through silence, through harmless-looking pauses. The narcissist begins testing boundaries, a subtle insult, a broken promise, a sudden disappearance, just to observe the reaction. If the empath stays quiet, the game escalates. On a subconscious level, this is not love. It's a primal urge to restore a sense of power. The narcissist doesn't love who you are. They love how you make them feel about themselves. When you praise them, mirror their greatness, they feel real. But when you start seeing the cracks, they panic. They cannot stand the light of truth because it exposes the void they hide. And so admiration turns into control and affection turns into destruction. Jung once wrote, "The thing that hurts us most is often what we need most to grow." But narcissists reject that growth. They choose an easier path to create a false self, the persona, a mask designed to receive admiration and escape imperfection. But every mask needs an audience, and when no one is watching, it begins to crack. That's why they need people like you, those who see, feel, and love deeply. They need your gaze to keep their mask intact. And the empath? They see the narcissist's darkness but are not afraid. They believe that with enough patience and love, light can dissolve the dark. They confuse understanding with saving, and that's when they enter a profound psychological karma, carrying someone else's shadow. Each unconditional forgiveness, each endurance for love, is another piece of darkness they absorb that was never theirs. From a Jungian perspective, this is called the projection loop. The narcissist projects their shadow, weakness, envy, fear, hunger for control onto you. And you, driven by your healing instinct, unconsciously accept it, believing it's yours to fix. You start working on their darkness, explaining, healing, correcting, while they simply sit and drink your energy as if it were life itself. The irony is that your light began it all. Because light doesn't just reveal beauty, it exposes what's unhealed. When you appear, their shadow awakens. But instead of facing it, they defend, blame, control, manipulate, diminish. Their goal isn't to kill the light, but to enslave it, to make it serve their darkness. They want you to keep shining, but only within their control. This is the essence of the invisible war, where two souls mirror each other, but only one is brave enough to see the truth. The empath does not fight with power. They fight with awareness. They do not retaliate with hate. They respond with consciousness. But before reaching that awareness, they pass through a fog, a stage, where they think they're in love, but are slowly losing themselves. Jung called this stage nigredo, the dark night of the soul. The old self collapses and the new one has yet to emerge. You feel like you're dissolving, unsure of what's real, unsure of who you are. You feel guilty for setting boundaries, afraid of being called selfish for stopping the giving, but that is the first spark of awakening. True light is born not from unconditional goodness, but from awareness. Energetically, the empath and the narcissist form two poles of the same current. One radiates, the other absorbs. They are drawn to each other because they feel the other's field can make them whole. But the current stabilizes only when both generate their own energy. The narcissist cannot. They live on borrowed power. The empath must learn to close the circuit, not letting energy leak unconsciously outward. This isn't selfishness, it's soul preservation. Once the bond is formed, the invisible war evolves into something more refined: manipulation. The narcissist stops shining to attract and starts reshaping reality to fit their illusion. If the empath isn't alert, they'll unconsciously become part of that illusion, an actor in a play they never wrote. The narcissist's power lies in distorting perception. They don't attack with violence, but with doubt. They plant small seeds in the empath's mind. Are you sure that happened? I think you're overreacting. Like a poisonous seed, doubt takes root. The empath, accustomed to self-reflection, begins to question themselves instead of the other. What feels like introspection becomes a mental cage woven from words. From there, gaslighting becomes the main weapon. It doesn't just make you doubt your memory or emotions. It steals your sense of reality. When every experience can be denied, I never said that. You're imagining things. You're making a big deal out of nothing. You lose your anchor of truth. And when you stop trusting your feelings, you begin to rely on them to define what's real. That's when they gain full control. Psychology calls this reality replacement. On the energetic level, it's infiltration, when someone begins programming your emotions and thoughts, replacing your inner voice with theirs. The empath, trusting in others' goodness, doesn't notice they're losing their spiritual autonomy. Every time they yield, stay silent, or try to understand, they surrender another fragment of their energy. Once the mind is captured, the narcissist turns to emotional control. They know the empath's deepest triggers are guilt and responsibility. So they weaponize those feelings, telling stories of their tragic past, their betrayals, their wounds only you can heal. These tales are soaked in pity, making the empath feel genuine compassion and a false sense of mission to save them. But that's the sweetest trap, the savior role. Once in that role, the empath unconsciously enters energetic servitude. They can no longer distinguish between kindness and depletion. They tell themselves, he's hurting, that's why he acts this way. She just needs a little more love. And so they keep giving even when they're empty. They don't realize that, to a narcissist, compassion is never enough. Every soothing moment only feeds the hunger. They love not to connect, but to possess. Gradually, the empath falls into the reward-punishment cycle. One day adored, praised, called the only one. The next, ignored, criticized, made to feel worthless. Their mind can't make sense of the switch, so they try harder to regain affection. That is emotional addiction. Each compliment is a dopamine hit. Each silent treatment is withdrawal. Before long, the empath is hooked not on love, but on temporary relief from pain delivered by the same person who caused it. Once emotional control is secured, the narcissist redefines values. They make you believe that your virtues, kindness, honesty, sensitivity are flaws. They turn your strengths against you. You're too nice. People take advantage. You think too much. You're weak. It sounds like advice, but the goal is to make you doubt your essence. When the empath believes their light is wrong, they extinguish it themselves. Simultaneously, they begin to isolate you not through brute force, but through subtle doubt. Your friends are jealous of you. Your family doesn't understand us. They make you believe only they truly see you. This isolation cuts off support and traps you in a parallel reality filtered through them. Gradually, you speak less, think less, and feel safe only when they approve. Every tactic serves one purpose, to make you smaller. When you shrink, they expand. When you fall silent, they define reality. And when you stop believing in yourself, they become the center of your universe. But what they don't realize is that in that very process, the seed of your awakening has already begun to grow, because the empath's soul, even when suffocated, still remembers the way back to the light. One day, in a tiny moment, perhaps when they witness a stranger's kindness, read a single line, or simply touch real stillness, they realize, this is not love. That sentence seems small, but it is the first crack in the entire structure of control. That realization does not come from the intellect, but from the soul. It feels like a gentle current running through the body, awakening the memory of who they are. The empath begins to observe instead of react. They stop explaining. They simply listen. They recognize that their silence, once a stolen weapon, can now become the instrument by which they reclaim their sovereignty. At first, the narcissist panics. When their energy source is cut off, they intensify manipulation, tears, remorse, even threats. They cycle through every role, victim, penitent, devotee, to pull you back. But the empath has begun to see. And once you truly see, the illusion loses its power. Carl Jung once said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Awareness, not combat, is the beginning of freedom. When the empath stops resisting and starts observing, they see the pattern clearly. Praise tied to control, tenderness tied to possession, love tied to fear. They recognize the loop and that they are under no obligation to keep participating. From that awareness, they start to re-establish boundaries. First, in the mind, I have the right to feel this. Then, gradually in action. I will not respond when I'm insulted. I will not explain what is already clear. Each boundary is a strand of energy sewn back in place. A body long accustomed to a vague state of tension begins to breathe again. Sleep deepens, intuition sharpens. Most importantly, they begin to remember who they are. As the light returns, they see the narcissist more clearly than ever, not as powerful or alluring, but as a confused soul living on reactivity. They perceive the fear beneath the arrogance, the emptiness behind the threats. And instead of hatred, they feel pity, not the blind pity of naive kindness, but the compassion of wisdom. He truly doesn't know how to love. In that moment, dependency dissolves. Letting go is not a grand gesture. It begins with small things. Not replying to messages immediately, not justifying yourself, not trying to make them understand anymore. Each small act is a step out of the matrix. As the distance grows, the empath's light spreads again, warmer, deeper, more conscious. There is a truth rarely spoken. Empaths are not merely easily hurt. They are sophisticated sensing systems, almost like the universe's radar. Their intuition is not random. It is the product of years of observing others' emotions, of nights spent feeling the room's energy before anyone speaks, of the body's memory of subtle changes in the air when deception enters. Empaths read others not through words, but through frequency. A glance, a pause in a sentence, a tiny shift in heartbeat, tone, or the way someone pulls energy from a space, all of it is recorded by their unconscious radar. They don't need to think, what's wrong with this person? They feel it, the way a body can feel thunder before the rain. This makes them a dangerous opponent in a narcissist's world where illusion and emotional manipulation are the means of survival. The empath doesn't need evidence. They only need to be silent long enough to hear the subtle inner voice. Something isn't real. If trusted, that sentence can save them years of suffering. But many empaths first learn not to trust their radar, raised to believe there must be a reason. Don't judge. Everyone has a good side. That is precisely the weakness a narcissist exploits. However, once the empath awakens, that radar can no longer be muted. It becomes an early warning system, a sixth sense that cannot be deceived. When a narcissist appears, the empath doesn't need a word spoken. They feel the disordered energy smooth on the surface, but cold and hollow at the core. They hear a voice whose rhythm is slightly off, too slick, too assured, lacking the natural tremor of truth. They see eyes that shine, but lack depth eyes that do not reflect a soul, only a mask. From a Jungian view, this is archetypal intuition, the soul's capacity to recognize darkness from afar after having met it before. The empath was once a victim, so their nervous system learned the language of wordless danger. Now it is no longer trauma, it is wisdom. They no longer react in fear. They observe with a cool stillness. In an energetic battle, stillness is the sharpest weapon. Narcissists live on reaction. Without reaction, they lose direction. Empaths know this, so they don't play chess with manipulators. They remove the board. They keep silent, not out of weakness, but out of understanding. Every word becomes data to be twisted. Every displayed emotion, fuel to be consumed. This silence is not retreat. It is cutting the supply. At this point, the empath's intuition functions like a multi-layered radar, physical layer. Their body contracts or opens around certain people. Emotional layer, emotions not their own, appear suddenly calm, turns to irritation, guilt, or shame out of nowhere. Energetic layer, the other's gaze feels like a hook tugging at the mind, trying to pull out a reaction. Spiritual layer, they dream of the person, or sense their signal entering subtle space, a nudge to keep distance. And when that radar pings, the empath no longer doubts, they trust it. They know the soul never warns without cause. From here, the invisible war changes course. It is no longer the narcissist hunting, but the light observing the dark. The empath does not go looking for manipulators. They let them reveal themselves. Darkness always exposes itself when it is no longer fed by others' energy. A narcissist deprived of reflection will betray their distortion in speech, behavior, and the contradictions in their energy. The empath need only be silent, and truth speaks for itself. Jung said, when a person is sufficiently conscious, they need not fight evil, for in that field of awareness, evil dissolves. The empath has reached this point. They no longer fight. When they enter a room, their energy is so steady that every emotional trick looks crude. Their radar doesn't only receive, it transmits, a field of honesty that makes the inauthentic uneasy. And then, one day, the empath's soul begins to knock gently, "Remember me." A recurring dream, an old song on the radio, a passing remark from a stranger that suddenly stirs their heart, all of it feels like signals from the universe, reminders that it is time to come home. This is what Jung called synchronicity, meaningful coincidence. When the soul reaches a certain level of awareness, the outer world begins to speak the same language as the inner mind. And the empath, when they finally listen, realizes that their inner radar was never wrong. They had only forgotten how to trust it. The battle shifts. Now, the narcissist is no longer facing a victim, but a consciousness that has awakened. The empath no longer argues, no longer reacts, they observe. They see the dissonance in the narcissist's words, sense the deception like the faint vibration of a string out of tune. They no longer feel anger, only understanding. They look at the narcissist as one might look at a frightened child, without justification, without hatred, only the realization that they no longer have to play this game. But their compassion has changed. It is no longer the blind compassion that seeks to rescue, but compassion with boundaries. The empath now understands that if they keep saving those who refuse to awaken, they will burn themselves out. So they choose to love from a distance, to love with understanding, not with sacrifice. On the energetic level, this shift is more powerful than any words. The narcissist senses it immediately. The empath's eyes no longer tremble, their voice no longer wavers, their energy no longer rushes to react. The narcissist feels cold, disoriented, unanchored. Because the empath, their former source of supply, is no longer a mirror reflecting them, but a transparent mirror. Nothing can be reflected there except their own shadow. That is the moment when the real battle ends. No one wins, only the light remains standing. Through calm awareness, the empath has caused the entire structure of manipulation to collapse. The narcissist cannot keep playing if the opponent stops providing reactions. And so they retreat confused, searching for a new host. But this time, the empath feels no pain. They no longer need closure, no apology. They understand now that this was never a war about love, but about consciousness. Each wound was a lesson, each heartbreak a baptism, each tear a purification ritual for the soul. And when they look back, they see the deepest truth. Their greatest curse, the ability to feel so deeply, was in fact their invincible weapon. For it is through that depth they can sense when energy shifts, when truth is distorted, when light is being covered. Because of it, they can love without blindness, trust without naivety, and be compassionate without being used. From this point, their intuition ceases to be a defense mechanism and becomes a lighthouse. They sense to navigate, not to suffer. They listen to the world not as a victim, but as a conscious being. The invisible battle, once a nightmare, now becomes a ritual of awareness. Each time darkness approaches, they no longer fear. They simply recognize, this is where I must keep my light. They neither flee nor fight. They stand there still, steady, and let their light do the rest. Because when a soul truly awakens, darkness has only one option: to dissolve. For darkness, in the end, is only the place light has not yet reached. If the narcissist is the architect of illusion, the empath is the keeper of the gate between reality and dream. They can feel the invisible current that flows between people, between words and emotions. They read the silence between sentences. They sense the fear hidden in someone's eyes. But to live fully with such a gift, they must learn to distinguish intuition from obsession, compassion from the need to be needed. For sometimes the desire to heal others is merely a way to avoid facing one's own pain. And it is here that the true Jungian journey begins. The path of individuation, the process through which a soul learns to unify its inner light and shadow. The empath becomes free only when they realize they are not responsible for healing anyone else's darkness. Their light was not meant to save, but to reveal. When they stop trying to change others and turn inward, instead, they return to their true energetic center, a place where peace no longer depends on anyone else. The key insight is this: darkness cannot devour light. It can only exist where light is unrecognized. When you know your energy is being drained, when you observe instead of reacting, you have reclaimed control. When your silence is not fear but a choice to conserve energy, you have already won on the deepest level. This is the essence of sovereign silence, a state of awareness beyond all manipulation. But the journey doesn't end there. After escaping manipulation, they must face the darkness within themselves, the part that allowed the game to exist. They begin to ask, why did I need to be loved so badly that I accepted destruction? Why did I believe I had to heal others to feel worthy? These questions hurt, but they open the door to true freedom. Jung called this the integration stage, when the empath is no longer merely a blind light, but a conscious light, a light that knows boundaries, that knows when to burn and when to rest. At this point, they no longer need to prove their goodness. Their mere presence is enough, and that presence alone makes the surrounding darkness fade away. Perhaps this is the true purpose of every encounter between the empath and the narcissist, not for one to win or lose, but for light to learn to shine wisely, for kindness to learn to coexist with boundaries, for love to learn not to dissolve identity. In that moment, when the empath stands amid the darkness without fear, they don't need to say goodbye. They simply walk away in silence. And that silence, calm, resolute, and without resentment, is the true end of all manipulation. For darkness cannot cling to what no longer reacts. When darkness loses its power to manipulate, when every emotional trick loses effect, what remains in the empath's soul is a void, quiet, raw, and unfamiliar. At this stage, they are no longer controlled, but not yet fully free. They've escaped someone else's cage, but have not yet learned to fly with their own wings. This is the most crucial phase and the one most mistaken for an ending. In truth, it is only the beginning of rebirth. Rebirth does not happen with noise. It is not revenge nor triumph. It is like a slow sunrise. The light does not appear suddenly, but spreads gradually, softly, until you realize you have changed. Not because you have become harder, but because you now see the world through the eyes of someone who has walked through darkness and still chooses to believe in light. The first stage of awakening often feels like deep exhaustion. The empath has lived too long on high alert, analyzing expressions, decoding every text, bracing for emotional impact. Their nervous system, stretched like a string, does not yet believe the danger is over. So they need time to deprogram. This is not weakness. It is a biological and spiritual recalibration. Many empaths go through sleepless nights, strange dreams, or an inexplicable emptiness. They think they are broken or numb, but in truth, their mind is relearning how to function without control. Before, every emotion was tied to another's reaction. Now, they must learn to feel without fear of judgment. This may take months, even years, but it is the foundation of true rebirth. As body and mind begin to stabilize, another phenomenon arises: the return of soul memory. The empath slowly remembers forgotten parts of themselves, small passions, dreams once dismissed as silly, simple joys once ridiculed. Each fragment returns, like birds finding their way home. They realize they once lived only to reflect others, and now they live to express themselves. On this journey, loneliness becomes an unavoidable companion. When you no longer react the way you used to, many around you won't understand. Some will leave, some will go quiet, some will even feel irritated because you are no longer as easy as before. But don't be disheartened. When your soul changes frequency, the souls no longer compatible will naturally drift away. That isn't loss, it's purification. At this stage, the empath begins to relearn the language of boundaries, not through fear or resistance. A boundary now is not a fence, but a circle of light. Inside it is the space of peace where they can be themselves. They no longer set boundaries to punish anyone, but to keep their love pure. A gentle no now carries the energy of respect, not defense, and this clarity makes their energy stronger and more pristine than ever. From Jung's perspective, this is the moment when the inner light and shadow begin to integrate. The empath recognizes that the parts they once rejected, weakness, fear, even anger, are legitimate facets of the self. They no longer fear negative emotions. They observe them, listen to them, and let them pass without judgment. In that moment, they become the driver rather than the victim of emotion. And that is true freedom, freedom from within. As they learn to stand in the center of the storm without being swept away, they begin to see the world with different eyes. They no longer see the narcissist as a demon, but as a soul still asleep, trapped behind a mask of their own making. From genuine compassion, the empath understands that not everyone is ready to face their shadow, and no one can be forced to awaken. This recognition brings a deep peace. They stop wanting to save the world and start wanting to live as their true self. A sign of rising is intentional silence. The empath no longer needs to prove anything. They do not explain the past, retell their pain, or need anyone to understand. This silence is not cold. It is still, like a morning lake. It is the proof of a soul that has stopped fighting, because it knows light needs no justification to exist. From that stillness, gratitude begins to bloom, gratitude for themselves. The empath realizes that every wound carried a gift. It taught them to see clearly, to love selectively, and to live consciously. They no longer ask, "Why did this happen to me?" but "What did it teach me?" That question marks a complete shift in consciousness from victim to creator. As their energy reconstitutes, they begin to attract new relationships that are calmer and more authentic. New people don't come to fill a void, but to walk alongside. They don't need each other to feel whole. They choose each other because they are both oriented toward the light. And this is when the empath realizes true love doesn't make you lose yourself. It helps you see yourself more clearly. From here on, the empath's rising is no longer only a personal journey, but a collective one. When one person heals, they open an energetic field for others. The way they show up peaceful, lucid, non-reactive becomes a mirror for wandering souls. This is how light spreads without effort. It is not a mission assigned, but the natural outcome of living authentically. On a deeper level, this rising has a spiritual meaning, soul retrieval. During the years of manipulation, the empath handed over fragments of energy with every endurance, every sacrifice, every time they believed a lie. Now, they call those pieces back, not through ritual, but through awareness. I no longer live in someone else's story. Each time they say this, a part of the soul returns. Each time they forgive themselves, a piece of light is stitched back in. And when the soul is whole, their energy is not merely restored, it becomes stronger, deeper, more directed. The empath's rising is a passage from reaction to creation. They no longer run from darkness, nor seek light outside. They understand that darkness is simply part of the flowering. A tree cannot reach upward if its roots have not traveled through dark soil. Humans are the same. We cannot truly mature until we've seen our own fragility, distortions, and weaknesses. When they accept the whole of themselves, choosing not to love only certain parts, they attain a freedom no force can take away. Looking back, they no longer resent those who hurt them. They feel gratitude because those experiences forced them to face themselves. Not to absolve the other, but to free themselves from the role of victim. True forgiveness is not forgetting. It is no longer allowing the wound to define you. From here on, they don't merely survive, they live with sovereignty. This rising is not a destination, but a new way of being, a peace that is unconditional, a confidence that needs no display. The empath now understands that strength is not in being endlessly kind, but in the ability to choose kindness without being exploited. They can love deeply without losing themselves, and empathize without being pulled into another's emotional storm. They are no longer a mirror, they become a torch. And this is when they complete the Jungian circle. From absorbing darkness to reconciling it, from reflecting to creating, from living unconsciously to living consciously. When their inner light is no longer shaken by the presence of darkness, they understand the war is over, not because darkness vanished, but because they no longer need to fight. When the empath passes through the tempest of hurt, when their inner light is no longer swayed by external storms, they enter a wholly different phase reconciliation. No more battle, no more fear, no need to prove. This is the state Carl Jung called wholeness, where the human soul is no longer split between good and evil, light and dark, but perceives the hidden order beneath chaos. This reconciliation does not come from forgiving others, but from accepting the entirety of oneself. The empath recognizes that within them were dark shards, 2 moments of weakness, the urge to control, times they tried to fix someone out of fear of being left behind. They see clearly that they too once projected, once sought validation from others. But instead of shame, they smile. Because that is how the soul learns love, through mistakes. As inner honesty deepens, something miraculous occurs. Darkness loses its power. There is nothing left to hide and therefore nothing to fear. They stop trying to become light because they see that true light never left. It was only covered by the dust of fear. Now they see truth in everything. In pain, a lesson. In loss, a release. In silence, an answer. Everything that once leveled them becomes part of the larger tapestry. When the mind stops splitting, the world stops polarizing. The empath realizes no one is purely villain or saint, only souls at different levels of awareness. The narcissist is not an enemy, but a mirror for their first lesson. Love cannot save someone who is not ready to love themselves. This realization is not cold, but profound. Only when you understand the nature of darkness can you love without fear of losing and give without feeling depleted. Reconciliation brings a new form of peace, peace without conditions. It does not depend on who understands you, who loves you, or who validates you. It arises from the awareness that everything is part of a process. When you feel grateful, even for those who once hurt you because they helped awaken you, you have stepped beyond the reach of darkness. In this phase, the empath becomes invisible in a very particular sense, not because they hide, but because their energy no longer provokes reactions in the unready. Those who once manipulated them now feel uneasy in their presence without knowing why. They no longer sense charge because the empath's light is now quiet, not projected to prove anything, only present as a natural source. As their energy stabilizes, they begin attracting others with similar frequencies, conscious souls. No more relationships built on lack, but connections grounded in wholeness. Here, love is no longer fusion, it is expansion. Each is a world unto themselves, together creating a space of truth and freedom. They have no need to control, because they understand that freedom is the highest expression of love. Jung once wrote, "No one becomes enlightened by fleeing from darkness, but by making friends with it." The empath now understands this not merely intellectually, but through lived experience. They no longer see darkness as something to eliminate, but as a quiet teacher, the one who forced them to find their inner strength. Without darkness, they would never have learned to shine consciously. Energetically, this is the phase of permanent rebalancing. Within them, the masculine, will, action, reason, and the feminine, intuition, emotion, compassion, are braided together. No more extremes, no more wild swings. They can act without haste, love without losing discernment, draw boundaries without becoming cold. This is sacred union, a state where mind, heart, and soul move as one. Living in this state, the empath becomes a conduit of light. They don't try to teach, yet their mere presence is a reminder. The way they speak, listen, and remain silent all carry the frequency of healing. They no longer seek justice in the outer world, because they understand justice as the equilibrium of energy. Those who cast shadow will face shadow. Those who bring light will receive light. On a higher spiritual plane, this reconciliation leads to the soul's resurrection, where one not only heals, but becomes a keeper of light for the collective. They begin to view the world with benevolence, not pity. They see others' pain without absorbing it. They feel compassion without losing clarity. And in this very balance, they discover the secret they sought all their life. True love never stands in opposition to wisdom. For when love is lucid, it is no longer just emotion, it is a creative force. When wisdom knows how to love, it is no longer cold, it becomes compassion. The two poles unite, and a person enters the state of oneness where they no longer live in reaction but in creation. An empath who has reconciled with darkness no longer fears repeating the past. If another narcissist appears, it is not punitive fate, but a check on the steadiness of their light. They need not avoid, they need only hold their frequency. Darkness can only reach where there are cracks. When the soul is seamless, darkness dissolves on its own. This is the closing arc of the Jungian journey, when one is no longer fragmented by opposing poles. The empath stops calling themselves victim or chosen one, and simply becomes human, a soul like any other, but one that has learned to live awake within a chaotic world. They can enter any circumstance without losing their center. They can love a flawed person without being dissolved by those flaws. They can stand in a crowd and still keep inner stillness. This is quiet power, the kind a narcissist can never possess, because it requires no audience. And when they look back over the entire journey from hurt, manipulation, and collapse to rebirth and reconciliation, they no longer see a tragedy, but a map of evolution. Everything makes sense. Every pain had a function. And in the end, they understand nothing was truly taken away. Only the unrecognized parts were returning to their rightful place. From here, their life no longer revolves around avoiding pain, but around living fully. They are not afraid to open their heart, because their boundaries are anchored in wisdom, not fear. They are not afraid to love, because they know love does not erase the self. And they are not afraid of darkness, because darkness is now simply a quiet zone they can look into, smile at, and then move on. The empath's awakening does not begin with light, but with exhaustion, a deep fatigue, not of the body, but of the soul after feeling too much, understanding too well, and forgiving too easily. They have lived in a world where kindness becomes a burden, sensitivity is mistaken for weakness, and the ones they love are the very ones who drain them. Awakening doesn't come from lofty teachings. It begins at the moment the empath can no longer endure. When the heart is overloaded and every reason to keep suffering collapses, the soul begins to whisper, "Enough." For the first time, the empath stops saving others and looks at themselves. What they see at first is not light, but darkness, the darkness of years of being used. The realization that unconditional compassion was often just fear of abandonment, the habit of pleasing others to avoid conflict. They discover that behind their kindness lie wounds never healed, the wounds of a child forced to grow up too soon, who learned to sense others' emotions in order to survive. That very skill reading minds, anticipating needs, soothing, made them a healing angel in the eyes of others, but a hostage within their own inner world. Awakening is when they begin to take off the mask of the good person. They no longer strive to be endlessly gentle, endlessly understanding, endlessly forgiving. They start daring to say no. And for the first time, they tremble afraid of being disliked, misunderstood, called selfish. But behind that fear, something else grows, honesty. The empath relearns emotional truth, that they have limits, needs, and the right to be tired, to be silent, to withdraw. This phase is often lonely. When the empath changes, the world around them reacts. Those accustomed to feeding on their energy feel threatened. They say the empath has changed, become cold, is not like before. And indeed, they are not like before. But it is not the loss of kindness, it is the restructuring of kindness on the foundation of awareness. In the quiet, the empath begins to hear the inner voice, clearly the voice once drowned out by the noise of others' emotions, now distinct. You do not have to suffer to prove you love. Day by day, they call their energy back from relationships, memories, and obsessions that once dissolved them. Each time they say no, a lost piece of soul returns. Each time they choose silence over explanation, they reclaim a fragment of peace. Each time they stop trying to heal someone else, they heal themselves. Awakening is not loud. It arrives like a hushed morning, no fireworks, only the clarity of consciousness. The empath realizes that intuition is not a burden, but the language of the soul. It does not demand that they understand everyone, it simply tells them when to stay and when to go. It does not command unconditional love. It teaches love with discernment, with awareness. A vital part of this journey is facing one's own darkness. After being wounded by others' darkness, empaths often believe they are pure light. But true awakening requires them to meet the instinctual parts they once denied: anger, selfishness, raw desire. When they accept they too can hurt others, they cease fearing darkness, because they understand. Light does not exist apart from shadow. It only has meaning when it can hold its own dark. This is the great turning point, from one who feels to one who creates energy. The empath no longer merely reacts to the environment. They begin to generate their own field. They enter a room and are no longer swallowed by others' energy. They set the tone of the room. They speak less, observe more, and their presence alone is enough to shift those around them. Then, one day, they notice something strange. Those who once hurt them no longer have any power, not because they forgot, but because the energy has changed. They look upon those former manipulators with understanding, no hatred, only compassion, because now they see that person never defeated them, they only helped reveal the empath's strength. Awakening is not escape from pain, it is the art of using pain as fuel. The empath turns wounds into wisdom, tears into intuition, and brokenness into a foundation for deeper seeing into the nature of all bonds. They understand that no one can truly save another. Every soul has its own journey to learn love and truth. At this stage, they live differently, not with dry rationality, but with clarity anchored in the heart. They listen without absorbing, help without carrying, love without surrendering sovereignty. They no longer fear being misunderstood, because they no longer need to be proven right. They stop trying to be good, they simply become authentic. Ultimately, the empath's awakening is the passage from blind empathy to bounded awareness, from dissolving to be loved, to standing firm in order to love more deeply, from seeing people as projects to seeing them as mirrors for self-understanding. And finally, they realize true love does not come from giving everything away, but from knowing who you are even as you give. At that point, they are no longer pulled into the energetic game of good versus evil, victim versus manipulator, love versus fear. They stand in the center still, radiant. They have walked through darkness and discovered that the light is not somewhere out there, but within. After awakening, the empath's journey doesn't end. It enters a new phase, energy mastery. Now they no longer define themselves by pain or by those who once hurt them, but by how they steward their inner light. Light is not only for illumination, it must be managed. And that is the empath soul's hardest lesson, learning to govern their power in a world eager to consume it. Before awakening, the empath often lived like an open mirror, reflecting everything, feeling every nearby emotion. Once they understand energy is a resource, they realize not everyone is worthy of their presence. This is not arrogance, but discernment. Not everyone needs to be helped, and not every pain needs to be shared. Some souls choose to remain in suffering because there they still feel powerful. Saving them before they're ready interferes with their learning and betrays your own path. So the empath begins to live differently. They choose. They choose who may enter their energetic space. They choose when to listen and when to be silent. They choose when to open the heart and when to let silence do the work. They understand energy cannot be destroyed, only transformed, so they learn to transmute rather than endure. If someone brings negativity, they do not absorb it. They witness it, let it pass, and use it as raw material for awareness. In this phase, the empath often grows quieter. No more debating to be understood, no more explaining to be accepted. They have lived through too many loops to know. Those who do not want truth will close their eyes no matter how brightly you shine. They understand that silence has its own frequency. and sometimes their silence is the universe's strongest reply. Yet a new challenge appears: energetic isolation. With higher awareness, the empath no longer resonates with old spaces. Shallow conversation exhausts them. The world's noise feels suffocating. They can stand in a crowd and still feel alone, because most around them live in egoic shells, never touching their true depths. So the empath must learn a new lesson: to befriend solitude. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself." In this phase, the empath understands that line intimately. Solitude is not an enemy, it is a teacher. In silence, they hear the soul's fine music, the heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of the cosmos, the knowing that needs no explanation. In solitude, they begin to see the world with the eyes of consciousness. When they stop seeking external validation, their energy naturally turns inward. There they discover a new field: creative spirit. They realize emotions are not to be controlled or banished, but guided like water into the right channels. Emotion, when transmuted, becomes intuition. Intuition, when trained, becomes vision, and vision, when enacted, becomes mission. After awakening, empaths care less about who's right or wrong. They care about the level of consciousness behind behavior. Faced with rudeness, they see fear. With boasting, they see an unhealed wound. With manipulation, they see a soul panicking in the dark. This awareness frees them from emotional entanglement. They can stand amid chaos and remain at peace because they no longer identify with surrounding energies. Gradually, they master the art of loving neutrality. Neutrality is not indifference. It is seeing with understanding. They need not play savior, nor prove their goodness. They simply appear as a frequency light, clear, non-judgmental. And then the miracle occurs. In their presence, others soften because light never argues with darkness. It simply shines. From here, the empath steps into the phase of creative consciousness. They begin directing energy outward with intention through writing, teaching, healing, creating, or simply living with such integrity that it inspires others. They understand there's no need to talk about the light, only to become it. Light needs no advertising. It naturally makes others feel safe in its presence. But the path isn't flat. As the light grows stronger, deeper layers of shadow rise to be seen. The empath will go through descents, periods that feel like going back to the start, with surging emotions, doubt, fear, and self-questioning. But this time, it's different. They don't panic. They understand it isn't collapse. It's purification. The more light there is, the more shadow must be unearthed and integrated. At this level, they understand the true meaning of healing. Healing is not the pain is gone, but the pain can be held without being devoured by it. Healing is when they can revisit what once broke them and feel no resentment, only gratitude, because every wound opened the path to awakening. Now the empath is like a great tree. Their roots sink deep into darkness, but their canopy stretches toward the light. They do not deny their shadow, they reconcile with it. And for that reason, they become whole. Jung called this individuation, the unification of ego and shadow to become one's true self. From this point on, the empath's energy changes completely. No more oscillation, no more reactivity, no more reading others as a survival habit. Their intuition is now quiet and clear, speaking only when needed. They no longer have to be on guard because they are no longer afraid. They have learned to trust themselves so fully that they no longer need to prove their sensitivity to anyone. Then something natural happens. Souls of the same frequency begin to appear. There is no searching. They are drawn to one another. Not to fill a void, but to create a stronger, energetic field together. The relationships of an awakened empath are no longer based on need, but on resonance. They no longer love out of fear of loneliness, but to expand life. They no longer give to be recognized, but because giving is the nature of light. And this is when the empath truly understands that the entire journey from hurt, manipulation, and breakdown to awakening was not a tragedy but a birthright. The narcissist and those who caused them pain were merely catalysts for discovering their own power. Darkness does not come to destroy light. It comes to help light recognize itself. The empath now no longer seeks a happy ending. They live in continuous awareness. They can cry and still be at peace, love without clinging, part ways without hatred, and be silent while staying connected, because they know that true love is not an emotion but a state of consciousness. When you see the world through the light of the soul, everything, whether painful or beautiful, has its reason to exist. Finally, the empath realizes a simple truth. They were not born to endure, but to transmute. Not to become a perfect angel, but a whole human being. Not to avoid the dark, but to pass through it carrying their light without judgment, without fear, simply present. That is when the first circle of awakening closes. No longer a battle between light and dark, love and fear, giving and receiving, only union remains. The empath is no longer a victim of emotion, but a keeper of life. No longer seeking understanding outside, they become the understanding itself. And as they walk quietly, the world around them begins to change, because an awakened soul need not say anything. Its mere presence ripples through the universe. When the empath reaches energy mastery, a strange stillness appears, not the silence of exhaustion, but the calm of knowing. Knowing they no longer need to prove, to defend, or to heal the world. They have traversed the deepest layers of pain, seen the true nature of both shadow and light, and understand that nothing lies outside of them. Everything is a reflection of the inner world. Every manipulator, every betrayer, every fear is a fragment of their soul, asking to be seen. As this awareness takes root, the empath enters what Carl Jung called soul integration, where ego, shadow, and light are no longer separate. They stop calling themselves empath, stop identifying with suffering or awakening. They simply are. All labels fall away. They no longer care who is narcissist or chosen, because they know these are only roles on a larger stage, the stage of evolving consciousness. At this level, they grasp a truth they once lacked the calm to see that darkness also has its sacred role. Without souls carrying narcissistic energy, the empath would never learn to set boundaries, never recognize the value of their light. Every wound and collapse had purpose, to wake them from the illusion that love is only giving. True love is consciousness, and consciousness is born through polarity, when light must look into shadow to know itself. Once the empath sees this, a profound gratitude arises. Not sweet gratitude, but the quiet thanks of a soul that has walked through hell and understands why. They no longer blame those who hurt them, not because they forget, but because they see the lesson behind it. When forgiveness no longer comes from moral duty, but from awareness, it frees both souls from the karmic loop. The empath now lives slower but deeper. They no longer chase happiness, because they know happiness is not a goal, but a byproduct of presence. They begin to notice beauty in ordinary things, the wind's whisper, light through a window, a stranger's smile. What once went unnoticed because they were too busy feeling, others now become sustenance. Life is no longer a series of tests, but a ritual of return. This return is not to a place, but to a state of complete presence within oneself. The empath is no longer afraid of others' energy, because they know energy only affects us when we resist or identify with it. When we accept things as they are, energy loses its power. It passes through like wind. This is the soul's highest freedom, freedom from defense. Then something miraculous happens. When they stop trying to protect their energy expands. It is no longer a fragile thing to preserve, but a field strong enough to attune the space around it. Others feel peaceful in their presence, as if the inner noise has quieted. They need not speak. Their presence itself is healing, not because they are trying, but because they have become the frequency of harmony. This is the stage where the empath truly becomes a transmitter of energy, not a mystical healer, but someone so honest, still, and consistent that they unconsciously recalibrate the energy of others. They do not heal anyone they hold space for others to see themselves. For true light does not force awakening, it invites it. And it is then that they recognize the essence of the journey, that every awakening, every healing, every collision points to a single aim: unity. No more me and them, good and evil, victim and perpetrator. Only the understanding that all is an expression of one energy seeking to know itself. The empath realizes that when they forgive, they are not absolving the other, they are releasing the part of their own shadow trapped in that image. This is the stage Jung called becoming whole. The soul is no longer split, no longer at war with its shadow, but begins to collaborate with it. The empath no longer fears their anger or pain. They use them as creative fuel. They write, speak, compose, and create spaces where energy is transformed. They understand that every emotion carries a message. Anger speaks of violated boundaries, sorrow of what must be released, fear of where the light has not yet reached. They listen to emotion as a teacher, with no fear or denial. And so, from someone who once survived by feeling the world, they become someone who shapes the world through awareness. They no longer wait for the world to change to find peace. They bring peace wherever they go. They no longer ask, "When will I be loved the right way?" Because they understand that true love is not what you receive, but the natural state of a soul no longer fragmented. When they love, they do not love out of fear of loss, but to experience the soul's expansion. They do not love to possess, but to reflect the other's hidden beauty. They know that true love does not promise forever. It says, "In this moment I see you as you are," and in that moment the universe opens. The empath has journeyed from living in emotional chaos to living in the order of the soul, from being drained by the world to nourishing it with their energy, not through sacrifice this time, but through awareness. They know when to withdraw, when to show up, when to speak, and when to be silent. Every action is guided by a balance between feeling and knowing. At this final stage, a subtle yet profound transformation occurs. The empath no longer sees their journey as a battle between light and darkness. They understand there is nothing to fight because darkness does not truly exist as a separate entity. It is simply the absence of awareness. When light shines, darkness dissolves. No need to strike, no need to win. And so they live as a bearer of light, not opposing anyone, only illuminating. From here, the world is no longer a frightening place. Wounded souls are no longer threats, but opportunities to share awareness. The narcissist is no longer a karmic enemy, but a temporary teacher, one who helped them remember who they are. And once they see this, they are truly free. For freedom does not come from fleeing the dark, but from no longer fearing it. Then their soul begins to shine, not blinding, not dramatic, but gentle as breath. A kind of light others feel without words through a sense of safety. Their presence becomes a space for collective healing. When an empath truly awakens, they do more than change their life. They recalibrate the frequency of an entire energetic field. Those who once hurt them, somehow, begin to change not because they were persuaded, but because the old fear can no longer be mirrored back to them through the empath. Darkness loses its foothold and dissolves. This is the ripple effect of light. It does not need to control, it only needs to be present. In this stillness, the empath understands the true meaning of their journey. They did not come to prove they are special. They came to awaken the specialness within every soul. For empathy is not the talent of one person. It is a collective intelligence awakening through souls who dare to feel, to love, to be wounded, and to rise. They no longer ask, "Who am I?" Because now they know, I am life recognizing itself. No need to fight, no need to prove, only to live as proof that light is real. And so the journey ends, not with applause, but with one deep, complete, peaceful breath. The empath has finally come home, not to a place outside, but to the sanctuary within. There is no narcissism, no wound, no division, only quiet, boundless, infinite light. Because when you are truly awake, You no longer want to win the war between light and darkness. You want to hold both and call it love. Once the empath has returned to their inner sanctuary, the outer world does not vanish, but its nature changes. Everything that once triggered panic now moves like soft waves, rising and falling to the rhythm of life. They no longer try to maintain peace, because peace has become a natural breath. What used to be called lessons are now simply movements of awareness like tides that ebb and flow without resistance. This stage is rarely discussed, because it is no longer dramatic. There are no thunderclaps of awakening or storms of pain, only transparency. Now the empath moves through life as if between two worlds, touching the material realm while sensing the subtle currents beneath all events. They work, love, and create, but every action is guided by intention. No longer reacting by habit, they act as an intelligent flow. They understand energy is not only for protection or healing, but for service. Not service in the old sense of self-sacrifice, but service to life. Where light is needed, they go. Where stillness is needed, they bring it. Where there is disorder, they do not control it, but help the space find its rhythm. Curiously, an awakened empath does not become ethereal or detached from reality. On the contrary, they go deeper into the human world. Only after reconciling with the shadow can they live in the world without running from it. They eat, love, and laugh, but do not cling. They do not seek life's meaning in grand gestures, but find it in how they pour tea, how they listen, the look they offer. Every gesture, however small, becomes a ritual of awareness. In their eyes, people are no longer good or bad, but different expressions of the same learning process. In the cold person, they see a child afraid of being hurt. In the manipulator, they see a soul pleading for recognition. Thus, they no longer feel separate from the world. On the contrary, they feel they belong everywhere, because they carry the essence of life. When you no longer fear the world stops attacking you. This awakening does not make them indifferent. On the contrary, they act with deeper awareness. The empath who once stayed silent for fear of causing pain now speaks with clarity without imposing. When they resist injustice, it is not anger, but disciplined love. When they teach, they do not preach, they tell stories. When they see someone in pain, they do not rush to save. They sit beside them and listen with full presence. At this level, they know true strength is not in power, but in steadiness. No need to prove, manipulate, or defeat anyone. A single steady gaze can pause someone in the middle of an emotional storm, because the energy of that steadiness anchors wandering souls. Thus, they no longer transmit energy as before. They simply become a stable source, no pushing, no controlling, just presence. The empath has gone far enough to understand that light is not the opposite of dark. Light is the capacity to hold darkness without losing essence. Knowing this, they become a center of harmony. No longer dividing the world into poles, they live in unity where everything, pleasant or painful, is life discovering itself. This is when they truly know how to love. Love at this stage is no longer attachment, infatuation, or expectation. It is reverence for the sacred nature of every being. When they look at someone, they do not see form or personality. They see the energy behind it, a soul learning its own lessons. In that moment, they love that person as if loving life itself. This love does not demand, does not need return, and is not wounded by refusal. It simply exists, like the warmth of the sun shining, because that is its nature, not because anyone deserves it. An empath at this level often becomes a natural guide. Without titles, they are still sought out. Those who are lost are drawn not because the empath has answers, but because they carry the peace others seek. They do not advise or lecture. They share their journey, a story in which everyone can recognize themselves. By simply living authentically, the empath spreads light without effort. One marked difference: they no longer fear change. Before awakening, the empath feared losing people, failing, being forgotten. Now they understand every departure is an energetic correction. When something no longer resonates, it leaves on its own. No need to hold, no need to push. They live in trust that what belongs will come and what is no longer needed will dissolve. This is not passivity, but faith in the sacred rhythm of the universe. They see time differently. No more sense of too late, behind, or missed. Each moment is in its rightful place. Living in presence, they understand the past needs no repair and the future no grasping. Everything unfolding is the most perfect expression of current awareness. Hence, the empath is no longer trapped in why, but asks, what is this teaching me? That question keeps them growing, moving, and continually reborn within their own life. In this stage, their creativity blossoms. No longer bound by heavy emotion, creative energy flows naturally. They write, paint, teach, heal, make art, build community, but none of it comes from ego. It arises from the soul's current. When you no longer think, what must I do to succeed, but simply, what wants to be born through me, every act becomes sacred. The empath turns every task into a meditation, every meeting into an awakening, every breath into a ritual. The world around them, once noisy, responds differently. They see many things collapse: power structures, artificial systems, relationships built on manipulation, but instead of panic, they feel calm. They know every collapse is a necessary phase of rebirth. Darkness rises not to destroy, but to be seen. Understanding this, the empath does not run, they hold light for those not yet ready. They become frequency keepers in chaotic times. In that role, they learn a new form of service, service through presence. No rallying, no proving, only living with integrity and kindness. Their stable energy invites others back to themselves. They are living proof that peace is not outside, but within. When others look at them, they recognize that possibility in themselves. Then one day, sitting quietly with the sunset, they realize the old war between them and the narcissist, between light and dark, was never a war. It was a dance between opposites to generate awareness. Without darkness to test them, they would never know their light was real. Without pain, they would never know how deep love runs. They smile, understanding that all has been perfect from the start. From here, they no longer live to learn, but live to radiate. They do not seek new knowledge to escape suffering, but to enrich the soul's experience. They do not need to protect themselves from anyone, because they have become their own protection. They do not pray for safety, because they are the energy of safety. If once the empath lived in reaction, pulled, swept, triggered, now they live in creative agency. Everything they do carries clear intention. What am I planting in this space? No more habitual action, they move. Like a gardener tending each seed of energy, every word, glance, and thought carries weight. And they know this is how the universe changes, not by war, but by the frequency sown each day. The empath understands that light never loses, not because it is stronger, but because it does not compete. Light simply is. Knowing this, they stop seeking victory. They choose presence. For what you resist persists, and what you truly see with awareness dissolves into understanding. Thus the journey closes with an opening into the infinite. No more goals, no more destinations, no more need to name it awakening. For they have learned awakening is not a state to achieve, but a way to live. When you pour tea, you feel the warmth in your hands. When you speak, you're aware of the energy behind your words. When you love, you keep freedom in your heart. The empath finally becomes a gatekeeper between the visible and the invisible. They live among people, yet every act bridges earth and sky. They no longer ask, what was I chosen to do? But simply whisper, thank you for letting me be. And perhaps that is the true destination, not perfection, not glory, but the profound simplicity of a soul that remembers itself. A soul that no longer needs healing, because it has integrated all its parts. A soul that no longer fears darkness, because it knows light cannot be extinguished, it only waits to be recognized. For in the end, the empath's awakening is not the end of a war, but the beginning of a new peace. A peace that does not come from outside, but radiates from within through their eyes, their voice, their presence. They are no longer seekers of peace. they have become peace itself.